Good evening, everybody. The time is 6:31. I'm going to call our meeting to order. Pledge of allegiance, please. Roll call, please.
Chair Jeffrey,
Here.
Board Member Westcott,
Here.
Board Member Bristow. Here. Board Member Fiddler,
Here.
Board Member Green,
Present.
Board Member Lemke.
Thank you. Next up on our agenda is approval of the agenda for the evening. Is there a motion?
Move to approve the agenda. Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the agenda. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Our agenda is approved. Action item A is approval of the minutes from our February 27th meeting. Anybody have any discussion regarding those minutes?
I move to approve item 5A.
Second. We have a motion and a second to approve the minutes. Roll call, please.
Board Member Westcott,
Yes.
Board Member Fiddler,
Yes.
Chair Jeffrey,
Yes.
Board Member Green,
Yes.
Board Member Bristow. Yes.
And our minutes are approved. Action item B is the rate study. Is there someone speaking to that tonight? Mr. Ukert?
Madam Chair, could I have a point of order?
You may have a point of order.
Thank you. So we had the rate study on the agenda tonight. I know at the last meeting, we had a board member that asked that that be brought back with help from city staff per section 3.26.5 of the 2009 Water Service Agreement. When a rate setting vote fails as it did in October of last year, Lochbuie and Brighton shall select a third-party independent engineering or consulting firm with experience mutually agreeable to both parties to conduct a rate study, and Lochbuie and Brighton shall mutually agree on the scope of the work and criteria for determining rates. The date, at least unless somebody's surprised, that's failed to happen. Regarding a 3% increase in rates, as suggested in the 2022 rate study, economics have substantially changed, and to believe that only 3% is needed is just a guess. We are not allowed to guess when we set rates because by law, it has to be based on actual costs. We are not a for-profit entity, so rates must be tied to actual costs. We are doing our rate payers a disservice by setting rates arbitrarily or based on the antiquated study that does not take into consideration today's economic reality. That's my, for the record, point of order, if I could.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fiddler. Mr. Ukert?
Well, I'll abbreviate mine. Yeah, I agree. I know we've been talking about a new rate study for some time. And one of the big assumptions, we kind of had to work through if we were looking at a metro water recovery alternative, which we didn't even get that far. We had we were teeing up formal approval to amend the water rate study to do that. Our opinion confirmed by our town attorney's office was that the agreements didn't contemplate just looking at any other options. So I thought we came up with a pretty solid way to do that at Board Member Green's initial request in June of last year. And so we finally got that. But now we've been informed that Brighton wants to basically send all of their wastewater to Metro Water Recovery, and that should take about 3 years. So that also is a big significant change that it will be hard to factor into a rate study at this point. So yeah, practically, that rate study at 3% is probably low. The thinking was just to do something incremental if it comes back through some study at 12% or something. So just taking smaller bites of the apple. But if there's not appetite by the board to do that, I suggest we immediately start working on what a potential exit from the water service agreement looks like, so that we can really just move on with planning. We've just had so many moving targets here. It's hard for us. And so now we're stuck with doing a mini expansion to really just make sure at the end of the day, we can serve all of our residents or customers in both communities with that. So it's just become difficult to move forward with just so many moving targets now. And had a great meeting with your city manager. So I'm hopeful we can really start to work on what the future looks like for both communities, and how we can just make sure service is not interrupted for two growing communities.
I move table items B and C, 5B and 5C.
There's a motion to table items 5B and 5C. Would you please add, would that be tabled to our next meeting?
Until a new rate study is completed.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second to table items 5B and 5C. Any further discussion? I would just like to say, I believe it's important to discuss potentially where we move forward with the rate study, in agreement with everybody that the one we have is outdated and probably not accurate. And I think that we have a large fiduciary responsibility to our constituents to make sure that we are trying to stay ahead of where things are instead of always continuing to play catch up. So I myself would not be in favor of tabling the conversation this evening. But
I guess I would add that the way to proceed is pretty much spelled out in the 2009 Water Service Agreement. And anything other than, we can have a discussion, but any action, any item would not be pursuant to Colorado law and the agreement that we have here.
If I may, Madam Chair, or
yes, Mr. Lemke, go ahead.
the 2009 agreement would require a unanimous vote of all the parties to redirect waste flow out of the BB draw. It is not a decision made by any one municipality. It requires all three entities to approve that. And that it's a worthwhile exam, but I would say one of the seminal points would be to determine if there's an economic reason to do so. The Brighton component is more significantly built out as a percentage than the Lochbuie component, but both have significant growth yet to go. But the exit is not a unilateral decision, it'd be a trilateral. And I agree completely with Mr. Green that the 2009 IGA sets forth a very clear process to come up with the rates. Since a vote failed, I think 3.26.5 kicks in. And that would be Lochbuie and Brighton either agreeing on an engineer or agreeing on two engineers who would in turn appoint a third engineer to do the rate study. And that I might suggest, since a vote had failed before, that may be the appropriate step is to use the 3.26.5 paragraph of the 2009 IGA.
Thank you very much. That is exactly why I don't feel like we should be tabling a rate study this evening. I believe it's something we should move forward on.
But this rate study is no longer valid, is the point I'm making. So I don't know what discussion we could be having on the rate study that we were submitted as part of the packet.
If I may, would you prefer if one raises hands? I'm not sure what the protocol is on Zoom here. Would you rather a hand be raised and wait to be called upon, or what is your preference?
I would prefer that you be acknowledged as the chair, but I acknowledge you, Mr. Lemke.
Okay, I just didn't know how to, Madam Chair, I think the appropriate language, I can share the language, but it's 3.26.5, which, if it is not approved by a supermajority, which it wasn't, then the rules of 3265 are to be followed, and that is the two towns would select a third-party independent engineer acceptable to both that would do the rate study, and if they can't agree on that, then they each appoint an engineer, and those two respective engineers appoint a firm that does do the rate study. So it would appear that if we want to look at rates, following that procedure, then that clicks in, that would seem to be the next logical step.
Thank you.
I'll be glad to share the language on the screen if you'd like.
No, I have it. That's what I was looking at on my phone, just for everybody's benefit. I
Okay.
came straight from work, so. Any further discussion?
I understand that the rate study is outdated. I guess my question is practically, and looking at the language in the summary, the study did not contemplate an increase in the sewer treatment PIF. Staff recommends it to address increased costs due to inflation. So I guess I want to hear exactly why that's not a good idea. Knowing that we have increased costs due to inflation, why we need to wait for a rate study, because as a consumer, it seems to me what Mr. Ukert said, to go, a 3% raise now seems incremental versus getting a 12% raise 2 years from now. I'd much rather get 3 now and 9 then than have it all hit me in the face. That feels like a disservice to our users who will feel that increase much more severely than they will a small cost of inflation increase now. So maybe I'm not understanding, so I'd just like to hear rationale.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
As we explained earlier, we are not allowed to guess what we set our rates at. It has to be based on actual costs by law. I cannot just say we were going to do it incrementally 3% because we think it is. It has to be based on an actual document that needs to be current. So we are not allowed to just say we think it's going to be this much by law. We are acting on a fiduciary responsibility to all of the members of the Lochbuie Sewer Board or Lochbuie Sewer. So this is a disservice to the ratepayers to say we think it's going to be so much. Unless it's based on an actual document, a current actual document, we can't just guess.
And if I could,
Yes, Mr. Fiddler.
thank you, Madam Chair. And it's in the agreement, right? So, Mr. Lemke and I both have cited that section. It's 3.26.5. This is what's happened, right? So that we had a vote, it failed. And unless I'm missing it, AJ, city staff, they've been back and forth around. They've sent over possible firms. I thought we were headed that direction. I'll have to follow the law. We should also follow the agreement. And I also heard you say you have this mini expansion. I don't think you're stuck with it. You need that regardless of what the path forward is, correct? Okay. I don't feel like you're stuck with it. I think that's the next step to provide capacity. So, but that answer your question?
It is, the minis, I'm sorry.
It does and it doesn't. When it says Lochbuie and Brighton shall select a third-party independent engineering or consulting firm, the part that's not clear in this agreement to me is, does that mean we hear, or it goes back to each town's board and they take that on and take it out of our hands? That doesn't make sense to me either, Mr. Ukert.
I just wanted to respond with that. Yeah, the mini expansion is needed because we were moving to 4 and then to 6 with board approval, and then, kind of investigate another thing. So we've had to take steps backwards. The chairwoman brings up a good point, and about a current rate study. So would that logic mean that a new rate study is needed every single year? Because rate studies are usually multi-year and they can have adjustments in there for inflation, which is what this did. So if the stance now is that to comply with the law, we need a current rate study, that would seem to me what's being said is every year before we approach these increases that are laid out in a rate study, there needs to be an entirely new rate study. That doesn't seem like a great use of resources, and something I'm accustomed to are multi-year rate studies. Not 10 years, but this has a short window on it. That's just my 2 cents. You know, we're going at the board, but this is just, it's very difficult as a staff to try and move this forward.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Green.
We wouldn't be in this position if you hadn't have been, or we hadn't been notified properly that we were exceeding limits or approaching the exceeding of limits ahead of time as per the contract. We weren't, which is kind of why we were in this position of having to do this fix while we debated whether to do the full expansion. I would request at the chairperson's pleasure, if I could have Katrina Asher, our finance director, please come up and explain the significance of this rate study.
I will defer to Mr. Lemke first and then welcome her.
Thank you. The procedures of the IGA only kick in when the parties can't agree. And I do think state law allows us to make an interim temporary adjustment pending a more formal rate study, and the rate studies can be multi-year. What 326.5 was intended to do is if the parties just couldn't agree, there was a procedure to sort of force agreement. And to answer the chair's question, the engineers would be appointed by the corporate boards of each. Lochbuie would appoint its at a city council meeting. Brighton would appoint its engineer at a city council meeting if we can't agree. And if they can't be agreed upon, then each has 10 days to appoint their own engineer to serve as the committee to appoint a third engineer. So there's mechanisms in there, but it would be, you know, if the parties at the board here can't agree, then it goes into a prompt appointment process. I think the redirection of the sewer flow out of the BB draw, although it may make a great deal of sense, I've seen no numbers, but that, you know, I think the rate studies, et cetera, should probably operate independent of that determination, because that can't happen without a three-way agreement that it would happen. So, interim discussions or interim raises can occur. I think the residents would probably prefer to get a smaller series of increases than one big one, but again, that's the pleasure of the voting members of the board. Thank you.
Thank you.
Apologies. Good evening, Katrina Asher, Finance Director for the City of Brighton, and I'm happy to speak to our rate setting processes within the City of Brighton and some of the background of how the rates are calculated and what goes into these studies, just so that everyone has a similar background of that information. So when we're talking about rates and rate studies, there are two components to that. There is a usage rate and there's a plant investment fee. The inputs and the calculations for those are different. The usage rates are based on your operational costs, what it costs to provide water, or in the case of sewer, treat that wastewater. The plant investment fees are for future expansion. So that's what you charge on development so that you can in the future expand your plant for the purposes of serving that growth. Looking back at that previous rate study, it looks like it was focused primarily on the operational rate and not necessarily the plant investment fee. So the rate increases as they've been applied from the board in the last several years have been the same percentage for both usage rates and plant investment fees. So if we were to do the 3% and apply them to both, it would be based again on that study, but that study looking at the plant investment fees only contemplated, if I recall, maybe $35 million for the plant expansion, not the $100+ million that we know that the plant expansion would cost at this point. So that's part of why we feel that that rate study is insufficient, because the inputs to that study have changed significantly since the time that that study was conducted. As far as the frequency of rate studies, I agree, you don't necessarily have to always do them annually. We do them annually for our water at the City of Brighton. We do a broader study every several years, and then we do updates every year, just to make sure we're tracking where we think we need to be. We always are assessing our revenues and expenses even throughout the year to make sure we're continuing to track along with that. And if our inputs change significantly, we talk to our rate consultants about updating that study again to make sure that we are staying on top of that, because we don't want to get to a situation where we are charging the same rate for several years and then get surprised and have a large rate increase for our residents. So we are monitoring that annually with a rate consultant and more frequently throughout the year with our staff. So that's our approach. It doesn't necessarily have to be a formal study every year if the inputs and the assumptions have not changed. But if they have changed, it does make sense to look at those again. And I think with this situation, knowing what we know now about the cost of expansion of the Lochbuie plant and also the options for utilizing an option to go to Metro, those assumptions are very different and will have very different effects on rates for both the Lochbuie and the Brighton customers. So what I would recommend is if we're going to look at a rate study, that we look at that 3-year timeline that we need to be able to evaluate and plan for that transition over to Metro. That would give both of our groups the information we need for those 3 years based on a common set of assumptions that we can all agree upon. So I'm happy to answer any other questions if you have them.
Ms. Westcott.
I know you're not a lawyer, so,
No.
but I'm going to ask this question anyway, because I've heard both representatives write and state that we can't do it because legally we can't use an outdated study. So is calling this, is that a judgment call about whether this is outdated or not? I mean, if we're saying that legally we can't do it, what's the legal definition of it becoming outdated?
So not being a lawyer, I can't answer that from a legal perspective, but from a financial perspective and just the management of an enterprise fund like a utility like the sewer fund, you're a nonprofit, right? The rates have to be set based on your actual expenses. And so those rate studies are taking into account all of those expenses that you have. It also looks at your customer base and kind of forecasts out what you would need those rates to be to cover those expenses, including future capital expansion, maintenance, all of those things are factored into that. You shouldn't be, generating a profit, right? That's what we want to be really careful we're not doing in those funds is we're charging what we need and not what we don't need. But we also don't want to get in a negative situation where we're running a deficit in those funds. So that's what we're aiming for there. We do need to make sure that those rates are based on actual projections and actual data. And not something arbitrary. And that's part of why we use rate consultants, because they're professionals in that arena. And they're very, very good at what they do and are able to take our assumptions, our data, and crunch those numbers to see what the outputs would be. So again, I don't know that I can comment on the legalities not being a lawyer, but we do need to make sure that we're acting on the behalf of our residents and our customers and making sure we're setting those rates based on accurate assumptions. So if the rate study gets too out of date and the assumptions have changed, that's when it's time to look at a new one.
Any further discussion? We do have a motion and a second in front of us. May we have roll call, please?
Board Member Bristow? No. Board Member Green?
Yes.
Chair Jeffrey?
No.
Board Member Fiddler?
Yes.
Board Member Westcott?
No.
Thank you. These items are not tabled at this point in time. So here we are back to the rate study.
I move to call item 5C. Let's vote on the resolution, revising the sewer treatment plant PIF rates and user rates.
You have not been recognized by the chair, Mr. Green, but I do hear what you have to say. I think we've talked about rate study. It's not, why is it listed as an action item?
It's a typo on the action item. It was included, just like it was last time. B shouldn't be there. There was not intended to be just a broad discussion on the rate study, but it was included in the previous resolutions as an attachment. So
Thank you.
it was just in there, but the resolution in C 2503 was the one that was just intended for this discussion that we just had.
Okay. Thank you very much. So Resolution 2025-03, revising sewer treatment PIF rates and user rates. Any further presentation or conversation of information around that prior to entertaining motion? We've all had an opportunity to take a look at it. All right, is there a motion?
So moved.
You're moving to approve the resolution, or I'm sorry, what?
Yeah, we can move to approve it.
Okay,
Second.
we have a motion and a second to approve resolution 2025-03. Any further discussion? Roll call, please.
Board Member Fidler,
No.
Board Member Westcott,
Yes.
Board Member Green,
No.
Board Member Bristow, Chair Jeffrey,
Yes. So it passes?
Fails.
It fails because it needs a supermajority,
Supermajority.
correct? All right, just making sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Staff and consultant updates.
I believe Kim has the only staff update for tonight.
Sorry. I thought it- Okay, I just provided some financials quickly. It didn't get put in the packet, but I provided it. They're unaudited 2024 year-end financials end through March of this year. So that's all.
Does anybody have questions for Ms. Baker regarding the financials? Okay. Board member updates. Is there anybody that would like to make an update this evening? Mr. Green?
Yeah, again, the only update I was gonna make, and it's like the worst kept secret, I guess. The Brighton staff has been exploring sending the Brighton flows to Metro Water Recovery as an alternative to the 6 million gallons expansion. And that has been complicated. So we believe that the best option for both Brighton and Lochbuie may be to send Brighton's flows to Metro. And so I think we should begin those discussions of what that separation looks like. And so I think we should move forward with that. That's Brighton's announcement. We formally announce our intention to pursue this path.
Thank you. Mr. Fiddler, anything you'd like to add?
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're very welcome. Ms. Bristow, anything you'd like to report on tonight?
Not tonight, thank
Mrs. Westcott? No, thanks. I would really like to see us get a rate study done. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Lemke, I'm so sorry. It's been a long day. Go ahead, sir. You're muted right now. Try again,
Hi.
please.
Thank you. Yes, I understand. I just finished work too, and it's been a long day. In terms of process, with the failed vote that occurred, the next step would be, can this board choose a mutually acceptable engineer for a rate study? And then with all due respect, Mr. Green, on the Brighton desire to move to the South Platte on its waste flow is certainly a worthwhile examination, but it is not a unilateral decision. And as such, representing the same area, what are the economics of doing so, and does it make sense? I think it's a high level discussion, but it should not impact the rate study. And at least I asked at the last meeting for any economics, and I've not seen any economics that would justify, or at least not even justify, just it would explain the logic behind a shift. I have no idea what the rates are, what the economics would be, et cetera, but I think that's something that's got to come before all three parties to determine, does it make sense? But I would
Thank you.
separate, this board may want to, just to save time, appoint an engineer to do the rate study.
And so you believe it is the purview of this board to make that determination for the rate study? Because I heard that it goes back to each municipality's board.
Let me take it, if I may, Madam Chair. Under the agreement, if you go to 325, the parties, Lochbuie and Brighton, would name an independent engineer if they can both agree. That agreement, I believe, can occur at this board meeting. If they can't agree, then each respective municipality would need to appoint an engineer, and those two engineers so appointed would appoint a third. So if this board can say XYZ engineering firm is acceptable, then I think that can occur at this board level without having to go back to the city councils. If they can't agree, then there's a procedure. Brighton and Lochbuie both must name somebody within 10 days.
Thank you. That helps clarify it for me quite a bit. And that's what I was going to say. I feel like we should figure out who it's going to be and move forward with a rate study post haste. I don't know if that starts with the town managers talking with each other, putting some names together, seeing if we have some agreement. I see nods from two people that, and so we'll go with that. And then hopefully when we have our next meeting, we can all agree as a board to move forward with somebody for a rate study. That would be what I'd like to hope for. That's all I have in terms of an update. May I have a motion to adjourn, please? I have a motion and a second to adjourn. All those in favor of adjourning, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? We are adjourned at 7:03. Thank you.